One of the greatest benefits of using VBA to do database connections is the ability to use user input parameters. Now, Power Query can do this, but it's a really complicated process. But VBA makes it simple. I can have any fat field I want in here, and then I can actually run my query based on whatever user input parameters. Now, I'm going to use the workbook that I created in a previous video, and so let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is adjust the formatting of my actual table just so I can actually have space for the user parameters. And so I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to add a few buttons and then put named ranges to actually for the user input. So the first thing, go and let's add a button. Okay, so all I did here was just some formatting. I've added two buttons with like a back and a forward option, and just highlighted that this is where the user is actually going to input, and then just a refresh if the user inputs. But by default, I wanted to make it so the clicking these buttons will move it to the next month, and it'll also refresh the data. But if they manually enter dates, and then it can refresh that data. So all I've done right now is created buttons. I haven't tied them to the macros or anything like that. Now, also, since I've inserted a row, I no longer want to copy all the data to cell A1. I want to copy it to cell A2. And so the next thing, also, I added named ranges. So this is start date, and this one is end date. And so I'm no longer going to use the actual between over here. What I'm going to do is actually put parameters in here. And this is where you can take a real advantage of the VBA, is actually pulling user input. And parameters in ADODB are just specified by question marks. And there's no way to name them as far as I'm aware in ADODB. It's just by question marks, and each question mark needs to correspond to a different parameter. And they are ordinal based, which means that if this first question mark is going to be used with the first parameter that you specify. This question mark is going to be the second parameter that you specify. And so there's no way to like name them and say this is start date and this one's end date. No, you just have to make sure the start date is your first one that you add to the command, and this one is the second that you add to the command. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually make these buttons work to point to the next months. And so I have a couple pre-made macros here, and essentially I have a go to previous month and a go to next month. So the go to previous, I want to make sure that this button is assigned to the go to previous, and then this button is assigned to go to next. And what that does is essentially I have a change month macro, and it's going to take whatever the start date is, and I'm going to use the date serial function to either add a month, or if I'm going to previous, I'm going to subtract a month. And then the date serial also knows that if you put 0 in there, it's going to pull the previous month. So that's how you get the end of month as well. So now that I've tied those buttons to these particular macros, now when I click them, you'll see that the months actually change, and we need to expand that a little bit. But I can just keep clicking next, and it'll add a month every time. And I can go back, and it'll add a month. And so now the buttons work. And this one I need to actually assign to the import data. And so now all my buttons work, but they're not actually tied to the parameters. So I've set these question marks, but I have not actually set this command to use parameters, to create the parameters and add them. So let's do that now. So I'm going to go into my SQL module, and I'm going to create this as a macro that in here that's going to be fairly generic, so I can reuse it in case I want to have other queries as well. So I'm going to call it create command parameter. And this is actually a function because I'm going to return the parameter. Okay, so I've created the shell of the function. And so it's just going to take a value, which is going to be like the start date or the end date, and a parameter type. And that's going to tell it whether it's a date, a string, a Boolean, a decimal, or something like that. And the reason I do that is because that'll help you, it'll convert. So if I don't have to worry, do I have forward slashes? Do I have dashes in my date or something like that? If you specify a parameter type, SQL does a much better job at converting it to the data type it's looking for. And so to do this, I'm just going to dim p as ADODB, new parameter, and set is a new one so I could start assigning values to it. And so this is just where it's actually going to take the parameter type and it's going to choose the ADODB val type based on whatever I say. And I'm just going to say it's all either a date, a string, and that's what I'm going to pass to it. And then the last thing, I need to actually put the value in the parameter. And then I'm going to return it. Okay, so this is a reusable function. So it's going to take the value and the parameter type, and it's going to return a new parameter. And so for every parameter that I have on my query, I'm going to essentially use this function to create it. So now I'm going to go back to my import module and create those. So first thing here, I no longer want to delete all the cells because that's going to delete those buttons and everything that I've created. So I don't want to delete all the cells anymore. What I'm going to do is actually remove all rows that are after 2 and below. So clean that up first. And then I'm going to get the values of the 2 dates. And that's, I'm going to reference those named ranges. Okay, so that's actually going to read the information from those named ranges, and it's going to put it in a variable called sStartDate and sEndDate. And now I'm actually going to need to put those into parameters. So I'm going to create a new collection. That's a function within VBA to actually have like an array of lists, and it's an easier one to work with because you can actually you don't have to declare how many are going to be in it. You could actually just declare the collection and then start adding to it and just keep adding and adding and adding. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set it to a new collection. So now that it's declaring, it doesn't actually do anything. It just tells me I'm going to have this variable. Setting it actually starts telling me, okay, it's a new array and it's ready for you to add stuff to it. Okay, so now I've created my parameters array and I've added them one at a time. And it's very important, like I said, that start date is first because I want it to be the first question mark. And then I'm going to add my next one as the end date, which is going to be the second one. And now, so I have these parameters. Now I need to pass that into my SQL command, run SQL. So I'm going to need to go in here and I'm going to have to add a new parameter. So I'm going to go up here, go over here, and then I'm going to add it. I'm going to make it optional just in case I don't have parameters. And it has to be a ref just because it's an array. And I'm just going to call it params. And it's going to be a variant because the parameters can be a bunch of different things. It could be dates, it could be anything, and variant is just easier to use because it can literally be anything. So now I need to add those parameters to this command object. And so I set the connection, I set the command type, and I set the command text to that SQL. Well, to set the parameters, you just need to add them here. And so I'm going to say if not is missing, just because in case the user does not specify any parameters, I want to make sure that this is actually test for that. Because otherwise, if somebody doesn't, because since it's optional, if somebody didn't specify parameters, it would throw an error. So I'm going to just have essentially an error handling on that. And I'm going to do a double error test just to be sure. And actually, it's not per query parameters, it's params. Whoops. Put that then in there so I can go ahead and fix this one. So these two if statements are just for error handling if the user doesn't pass any, or if it passes a collection that is empty. But since now if it's gotten all the way to here, that means that it's a collection and it has parameters in it. So I'm just going to say for each p in params, put the next down there, dot parameters, and that dot is pulling from O's command. So that's essentially saying O command dot parameters, and I'm going to append all the different parameters. And so this for loop is going to keep looping through the entire collection and append each parameter to the O command object. So that's it. That's all you really have to do, is just so you create the parameter collection, pass it to the command, and when this executes, it will run that. Now I'm going to go back one more thing, and now every time I click that go to previous, I want to call import data just so it actually refreshes from here. And I also need to pass my query parameters in here. And right here, I'll do some formatting changes just to pretty it up a little bit and move it so it's not auto-fitting all the columns and things like that. And then one last thing, go back here, add the import data to the next one as well. And so now, every time I click this, as you can see, it's running this every single time. It's putting those parameters, replacing these values here with the question marks with these values that are right here. And so every time I click next, it does that. And so say if I wanted to do 715 to 720, and I don't know if there's actually data here, and then just click refresh, it gets that. And if I just wanted 715 only, so I can user input that and then click refresh, and it's only going to grab that particular date. So that's how you can use VBA to get user parameters that are specified using cell values. And you can do that in Power Query, but it is extremely complicated. It's not even in the query, like this, the actual SQL part of the query. It's you do it in the source of it, and you have to do let equals this and blah blah blah. It's a very complicated formula to actually use parameters that come from cell values. VBA, way easier, way more streamlined, and you can have as many as you want, and you can make this dynamic. So VBA and using ADODB is a fantastic tool and a very dynamic tool if you're looking to create a front end to query a database. I hope you found this video useful, and if you did, please like it and subscribe it. And in the next videos, I'll show you how to actually start updating data and inserting data from SQL. And so that's where Power Query completely cannot handle. Power Query is a read function, and so VBA, you can actually update data and send data back to the SQL database. So I will see you in the next one.